in this demo, we'd like to show how we can implement a simple talk application in Java that will have a user interface for the client. Okay, so we're just starting by loading Eclipse. We are running on Ubuntu. Okay, so basically the application will just create a server socket and will accept client connections and will broadcast the message sent by each client to the rest of the clients. Okay, so basically we start by creating a new project, and I will create only one project to host also the server and the client. So I have here installed the window builder plugin, which allows me to create the client interface. Sorry. Okay, so as you can see, we started creating a new project, and I selected from the window builder SWT designer, and I'm creating an SWT JFace project. So I'm gonna call my project talk, and basically this will host the server and the client too. Okay, so that's my project that's going to be created. Okay, wait a little bit for this to happen. And now here I'm going to create just a simple package which will be hosting the server. Okay, and eventually I will have a class that's going to be a console, and my class should contain the main. Okay, so I'm gonna enlarge a bit the font just for you to see better. I'm gonna go to the settings and then change the basic font. Sorry for not doing that before. So let's say that this will be readable, easier. Okay, so in here, what I do, I'd like to create a server which will listen for client connections, and I would like to be able to create my server. Okay, so I'm gonna create a new server, and I have to create this. I press Ctrl+1 in Eclipse and I choose to create this class. So my server will start on a port, and let's say that I have here the port. If the number of arguments equals 1, so I can pass the port in the command line, then I'm gonna pass with integer the arguments of 0. Otherwise, let's choose a default port. Now it says that my server is not auto-closable, so I'll just go in here and okay, first of all, it's the length of the arguments that should be equals to 1, and now it says that this is not auto-closable, so I'm not able to do anything in here. If I press Ctrl+1, it's not solving it. If I go here, it says that it's not auto-closable, but nevertheless I can make my server auto-closable, and this means that I have to implement the closed method. So I would like to be able to start the server on this port, and I resolve the creation of the start method. But then when my server has been started, I will display a message to the user like server is running, and I will say that you may type exit to stop it. So I'd like to be able to read administrative commands and then use them accordingly. Okay, so this is saying that I have to handle an exception, so I would prefer to add a catch in here, and in case I have an exception, I will just display the localized message of the exception. Okay, so now I say that my server is running. That's fine. But then in the end, I'd like to be able to stop the server. And I'll just create this stop method. Because this should be auto-closable, on the close method, I will just call the stop method on my server. Okay? And in between, I'd like to read commands from the command line. For that, I will create a buffered reader, which will allow me to read each line at a time. This has to be created on top of an input stream reader. And in here, I have the console, the standard console in, which is the system.in. I created my reader, and in here I will just read a command from the command line with reader.readLine. This can throw an exception. This method, the stop method that I call here, it's unreachable now because of this. Okay, but in case my command is null, so the console was closed, or I entered exit, then I'll just break my infinite loop, and then I will stop the server. If by any reason I receive an exception in here, because this can throw an exception, I will just surround this with a try catch, and in case I will have an exception, I will break the infinite loop as well. Okay, so with this I'm able to start my server and then stop it when I type exit. When I start the server, actually, I like to create a socket which will be able to accept connections. So what I do here, I go to my start method and I create a socket in my class just by creating a new server socket on this listening port. Okay, so this has to be imported and then the field has to be created. This can throw an IO exception, so I will throw it outside as well. When I stop the server, nevertheless, I will check if the socket is not null, and if so, I will just close the socket, and then this can throw an exception as well, and then I can just release the socket by making this null. Okay? When I start the server, however, I would prefer to stop it first in case the server was already running, and then I will just create this again. Well, when I create the server and when I start it, someone has to listen for accepting connections. So it's not enough that I create a socket in here. I have to create a new thread which is gonna run on my class. Therefore, when I create a thread, I have to provide to the thread an implementation of the runnable interface. So I will just let my class implement runnable interface, and now I have to add the only method in the run interface, which is the void run method. So I create a thread here just to split the execution flow so that my console would be able to advance and execute these instructions and wait for the commands from the user, while the thread of the server will listen for accepting connections. Okay, so what I do here, first of all, while the socket is not closed, I'll try to accept a connection. So what I do here, I create a new socket, therefore I will make reference with this to the socket in the class. I'm creating a client socket this time with my server socket by accepting a client connection. This can throw an exception, so I will just surround it try catch, and in case I will have an exception, I do nothing, so by default I will continue. So this is what it does automatically. Okay, so when I accept the socket, I'm gonna create a new connection on top of this socket, and this is gonna be actually the class that's gonna be in charge of executing the connection. So now I create the class connection, and it still has to I have to create a constructor with the argument socket. Now that's fine. Okay, so this is what I do in my server. I just listen the connection and I accept client's connections. Okay, when I have a client, first of all, I need to store this inside my class. So I will just define a field called socket. In here, I will just use the value of this to define my socket. Okay, so basically this is the socket that's received, that's accepted by the server. But then I need to have a reader in order to be able to read commands on the socket. So I'm creating a new buffered reader on top of a new input stream reader on top of the socket.getInputStream. Okay, I have to define the field, and now it's done. This can throw an exception, and I will just throw this away. If I have to write something to the socket, then I need to create a print writer, which is able to write each line at a time, and I will just get the output stream of the socket. And then I have to create the writer as well in my class. So up to now my socket is able to handle a client connection, to read and write from that. But the problem is that I still have to handle a connection in parallel. So when I accept a connection in my server, I don't want to block the server. So I will have to create a new thread running these lines of code in parallel, the following lines of code in parallel. So I'm creating this, I make my connection implement runnable, I add the unimplemented method, and this is going to be the code that's going to be executed in parallel. So what I do here, first of all, in order to be able to broadcast the message, I have to create a static field which will be a list of connections. I'm gonna call this connections, and I will create an implementation of the list, which is an array list. So each time I create and I accept a new client connection, I'm gonna access the connections in order to add the current thread, the current connection. In the end, I will just have to remove this from the list of connections. I'm doing the synchronized access to the connections because I have multiple connections running in the same time, and I need to be able to access the connections so that when I add or when I remove something to the list, this won't break the list. So what I do here, while my socket is not closed, I'll try to read a message. Let's call this message. I have a reader and I will just read a line. This can throw an exception, but in case I will have an exception, I will just surround this with try catch. So, sorry for that. So I will just surround this with try catch, and if I have an exception, then I'll break, because it means that I was not able to read from the socket. If the message is not null, then I'll call a method to broadcast the message, and this method needs to be created. So I have this defined below. In the end, I will synchronize the access to my connections, and I'll just remove from the connection this connection. Okay. Then, when I do a broadcast, I like to send the message received by one client to all the clients. So I take the connections, I iterate with one connection, all the connections. Sorry, I define my iterator, and I just use the current connection to print line to output the message. But in the end, because this is using a buffer, I'll have to force the flash on the buffer just to send the message immediately. Okay, so this is how I send the message from one connection to another. So if I receive something, I will just send it to the client. In order to be able to use the telnet and to have an echo on the telnet without having to enter something first, I'll just, when I start the connection, I'm gonna write something to the connection. I'll just print line something, which will be, let's say, the name of the server and the version, whatever you like. And with my writer, sorry for spelling this, I'm gonna flash this. Sorry. Okay, so now that I have this, I can try and run it, and I will just run my application as an application, a Java application. I have the console in here, and if I just open a terminal and I start a telnet on localhost on 8080 port, it says talk, and it worked. It just worked. So it's sending back the message to my connection. If I open another terminal and I do a telnet on localhost as well, I can ask for if it really worked, and of course the answer is yes, so it worked. Now when I stop this, my server is still running, but when I press exit, I received a null pointer exception, and I have to check what went wrong. So in here, I'm trying to to see if the socket is still running, and the problem was that when I stopped the server, this was deleting the socket. So I have to check that first my socket it's not null and it's not closed. And now I should be okay, and I shouldn't receive this error. If I run this again, I mean not the connection but the console. I did this in my console. So if I run this again, not the server but the console, when I run this as a Java application, and when I open a terminal and open a telnet on localhost port 8080, if I just close this, no, I'm not able to close it, but I don't have any connection, any command on the client side that can close it, but nevertheless I can close the terminal itself. So now everything runs okay, except that I'm not able to stop my server from the console. Nevertheless, I break this stops the connection, and when I stop the connection, I'm closing the socket, so this should actually stop this. Anyway, let's implement the client also. For the client application, I'm gonna create a new package. Let's just call this talk.client, and in here I will just create a simple sorry, I'll go to create, I'm gonna create from window builder, from the SWT designer I will create an SWT window, application window. Let's call this a form, and this is going to be my client interface. Okay, so I'll just get rid of the commands, not to keep them in your way, and in the end I'm going to design my interface. By the way, the name of the display text should be talk on my form. When I go to the design, okay, that's my interface. I will just go to the layout, and instead of using an absolute layout, I will use a grid layout, and I will just put my user interface items. Like for instance, I would like to have a simple list. So from my controls, in the end, come on. Just because of the size of the display. So I need to have come on, where is it? A list. Yep. And I need a simple text. Okay, and I would have to grab all the horizontal space for this component. I'll just say that it has to fill the space, and then I'll grab the vertical space, and then I will have to go in here and say that it has to fill also the vertical space. This would arrange accordingly to the corresponding item above actually, and so it is filling the space and it's grabbing the horizontal space as well. So my list has some properties, some style. So I would like to have a horizontal space if need, horizontal scroll if needed, but also a vertical scroll if needed. And this is going to be my text where I will enter a message, and I would like to be able to see all the messages sent by all the clients in my list. So that's my interface. If I go to the source and I run this as a Java application because it has a main, I just see this list and I'll be able to enter some text in here. Okay, so that's clear up to now. My form that's loaded by the main would need to have, we need to know how to connect to the server. Therefore, let's say that I define the name of the host, and let's say if my arguments have a length of 2, then I'll just take the first argument as being the host. Otherwise, I'll use localhost as the name of the host. I'll do the same with the port. If I have 2 arguments, then I'll take the first argument and pass it from a string, the second argument actually, pass it from a string to an integer. Otherwise, I'll use a default value for the port. In the end, I'm going to use these values, the host and the port, as being a parameter of the constructor. And now I'm just creating the constructor in here. Sorry. I will just retain the values, the host and the port in my class, because I'm going to create the connection outside the constructor. Okay, so when I open the shell, this is going to be creating the contents, is going to open the UI, then it's going to lay out the UI. And now I can create a socket that's going to be a new socket, and I will connect the socket on this endpoint. And now I create the field. This can throw an exception, so I'll just throw this outside in my open method. I'm creating the socket. Okay. You know what? In case I have an exception, why don't we display this in the console? So I'll just surround this, and I will just display my exception, the localized message of the exception. Okay, that's an easy one. Now, I open the socket. but I still need to be able to read and write messages with this socket. So I'll create a reader by creating a new buffered reader, and I'll just create an input stream reader on top of my, not system, but on my socket get input stream. The reader does not exist, and now it was created in my class. I create a writer, which will be a print writer, and this will be on top of the socket get output stream. And I create a writer as well. Now, sorry, I have to listen the connection, so I'll just create a new thread, and the thread is going to be created on top of my window, and I have to let my window implement runnable. So I go here and I add the unimplemented methods. So this is adding the necessary run method. After disposing the UI, I will call my socket to close. When I run it, as far as my socket is not closed, I'll try to read a message with my reader by reading a line from the socket. This can throw an exception, so I'll just surround it with try catch. If I receive an error, then I will just break from my while. Okay, so if my message is not null, then I do like this. I have to display it on the UI, but the problem is that the thread that has been created, the UI, it's not the one. Actually, this thread is not the one that has been creating the UI. So I'm kind of trying to access components created by a different thread from another thread. And this is kind of illegal. So what I have to do here, I will have to get the display, the default display. So I take the display, take the default one, and I ask to execute an asynchronous task, which is gonna need a runnable. So with this, I intercept the main thread, and I call the main thread to execute on its behalf this code. So what I do here, I have a list which is not defined as a field in my class, and now it is. And with the list, I will add the message that I received, and this has to be final in order to be available here. Okay. And now, if I receive something from the server, then I will display it. Still, I have to send data to the server. I go to the actions on my text field, I go to the key actions, and when the key was released, I would like to send a message to the server. But first, I do this only when I release the enter. So I get the key code and check it to be the SWT carriage return. I'm not going to send empty values, so I need to go to the text and get the text, and get the text, okay? Text get text, and then if I trim this and the length is greater than 0, then I will send the text. So what I do here, I define a message, I go to the text, get the string, trim it, remove the beginning and ending spaces, and then I use the writer to print the line with the message, with the message, and then I flash the writer, and that's gonna be all. So now let's start the server, I just remove the unused imports. So this is my server. The server is not running, and now I just start the server. Okay, so now it's running. I'm gonna start the client application. This one, it received the talk value from the server. Okay, when I send something, I send the value, but it's not clean from here. It's not removed. So I'm gonna stop the server and I will change this. I could easily change only the client and not stopping the server, but it doesn't matter. When I send this to the server, I will just set the text in my control to be an empty one. And now I go back in here and I run this again, and then I run the client application as well. And now I receive the message that's okay, and the message was fine. If I start, for instance, a terminal and I connect with telnet on the local host on 8080 port, this is going to be message from the terminal, and when I send it, it's echoed back to the terminal, but I also received it in here. If nevertheless I go to another session with Elementary OS, which is a different version, different flavor of Ubuntu as well, I start a terminal in here, and then I go here, I open another terminal just to run the ifconfig, and this is my IP address. I copy this, and then I go to the other virtual machine and I start a telnet with this host on 8080 port. Okay, this is going to be a message from Elementary OS. Elementary, nevertheless. Elementary OS. Okay, I received the message back, but if I go to the first to my Ubuntu virtual machine, then I see the message received here as well. So I'm able to receive messages from across the network, and with this approach I'm able also to do it concurrently. So just to recap, in order to have such application, I would have first to create my network connection to start it, but when I start my connection in here, I will create a thread to listen to this connection and to accept client connections. When I accept a client connection, nevertheless, I create a new thread to read messages from a client and send it to all the clients that's connected. So that's all.